Hello again. I'm Dr. Scott Davis. Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Famous Addictions That Changed History. In each one, I take you through a brief journey of how addiction to drugs drove a famous person, good or bad, living or dead, to not only change their life, but ultimately the course of history. Addiction, of course, is a devastating disease to fall prey to no matter who you are. Rich or poor, famous or not, the disease of addiction does not discriminate. Famous people are often seen as invincible and untouchable, but they too suffer from addiction. There have been countless figures who have battled with addiction throughout their lives. Many went on to influence society in some way through their work, good or bad. In each of these episodes, we explore the captivating story of another important person in history who struggled with addiction, how it changed their own life, many lives around them, and history in the process. Our next very famous person to discuss is, in fact, our 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy is remembered as one of America's most beloved presidents, but few are aware of the addictions that plagued him throughout his time in office. JFK suffered from a wide range of ailments, including Addison's disease, colitis, and chronic back pain. To cope with these conditions, he was prescribed an array of medications, including codeine, Demerol, methadone, Ritalin, meprobamate, which was an early form of a tranquilizer, and Librium. In addition to these treatments, he was also injected with a cocktail of vitamins and hormones and even methamphetamine by his doctor, Dr. Max Jacobson, a German-trained physician known by his Secret Service code name, quote-unquote, Dr. Feelgood. JFK's addiction had a profound impact on his presidency and the decisions he made while in office. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, one of the most dangerous moments in modern history, JFK was reportedly taking high doses of such drugs to manage his pain and anxiety. This could have potentially impaired his judgment during this critical moment in history. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was a pivotal moment in the Cold War and a defining event in John Kennedy's presidency. In the face of nuclear war, JFK made difficult decisions that ultimately led to a peaceful resolution and strengthened his image domestically and internationally. However, recent research has raised questions about the potential influence of drugs on JFK's decision-making process during this critical time. John F. Kennedy suffered from various medical conditions throughout his life, including Addison's disease, an adrenal gland disorder which caused him severe chronic pain and fatigue. To manage his symptoms, JFK relied heavily on prescription medication, such as steroids and painkillers like Demerol and methadone. While these drugs were necessary to treat his medical condition, they also had serious side effects that could have impaired his cognitive ability and decision-making process during the Cuban Missile Crisis. For example, Demerol, a powerful narcotic, is known to cause drowsiness and confusion, while methadone can lead to mental clouding or even hallucinations if taken in large doses. Heart rhythm disturbances can also be a side effect of methadone. These effects could have significantly impacted JFK's ability to make sound judgments during the crisis. Furthermore, physical and psychological dependency on these drugs may have compromised JFK's mental state at the time by increasing anxiety or depression, which could have affected his leadership capabilities during this crucial period in history. While there is no definitive evidence that JFK's reliance on drugs had any direct impact on his decisions during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's important to consider how physical and psychological dependency on these medications may have influenced his cognitive abilities and emotional state at this critical juncture in history. Ultimately, this issue raises important questions about JFK's legacy as a leader who was able to successfully navigate one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War without resorting to military action or nuclear war. Similarly, JFK's reliance on drugs may have contributed to his controversial decision to launch the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, which ended disastrously for the United States. Kennedy inherited the mission from his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower, and approved the plan to invade Cuba with CIA-trained Cuban exiles. However, due to the side effect of drugs he was taking, Kennedy may have been unable to make sound decisions or accurately assess the situation at hand. This could explain why he failed to anticipate the Cuban response or recognize that Fidel Castro had mobilized his 200,000-man militia prior to the invasion. The consequences of this miscalculation were disastrous for Kennedy's presidency. Not only did it lead to an embarrassing defeat for the United States, but it also damaged America's reputation abroad and weakened its standing in international affairs. Furthermore, Kennedy was forced to accept responsibility for the failure and take full blame for it in public appearances. Given all this information, it is not difficult to consider how JFK's drug addiction may have affected his performance during the Bay of Pigs invasion. It is possible that if he had been more alert or better able to assess risks associated with such an operation, then perhaps things would have turned out differently. Ultimately, though, one can only speculate, as there is no way of knowing what would have happened if JFK had not been under the influence of drugs at the time. John F. Kennedy also had another long-standing secret addiction, methamphetamine, today also known by its street names speed or crank or crystal meth. His doctor, Dr. Max Jacobson, had known JFK since the president's first presidential debate against Richard Nixon. The night of the debate, Dr. Jacobson fueled a very tired JFK by plunging the formula of methamphetamine, sheep and goat blood into JFK's voice box. The result was clear within minutes, and an artificially energized Kennedy changed American history that night by upstaging Nixon. JFK's energized performance then helped him win the presidency. In 1961, Dr. Jacobson's office was broken in by the Soviet Union KGB. This would have meant that Soviet Prime Minister Nikita Khrushchev was most likely aware of Kennedy's debilitating conditions and drug addictions. This information would have given the Soviet leader decided advantages over negotiations with Kennedy. This is yet another example of how Kennedy's addictions would have influenced the course of world history. Of note, in May 1962, when Marilyn Monroe, appearing intoxicated, famously sang "Happy Birthday" to then-President Kennedy, she was fueled then by Jacobson's methamphetamine elixir. In addition to influencing key events during his presidency, JFK's addiction also had a lasting impact on American culture and politics. His reliance on drugs helped normalize their use among politicians and other public figures who saw it as an acceptable way to cope with stress and illness. This attitude has persisted today, despite growing awareness about the dangers of drug abuse and addiction. Finally, it is important to remember that JFK was more than just an addict. He was also a leader who championed civil rights and inspired millions around the world with his vision for a better future for all Americans. His legacy of the incredibly good that he did for all Americans should not be overshadowed by his struggles with addiction. Instead, I believe it serves as an example that even those facing great adversity can still achieve greatness if they persevere through difficult times. It is always important to note that these individuals' addictions do not diminish their accomplishments and contributions to society. history. In fact, as we see, ironically, sometimes the effect of their addictions have had profound consequences for their work. Their stories, though, serve as reminders of the complex relationship between addiction and as well as the need for greater awareness and support for those struggling with addiction. Please remember, if you or someone you know has a problem with drug addiction, click on the link to my website at scottdavismd.com to work with you or someone you care about to find a path back to recovery and a better life. Please subscribe to this podcast and you'll be immediately notified of new episodes. As a subscriber, you would also be entitled to exclusive podcast episodes for subscribers only and other bonus features. Please join me again on this channel to explore how the addictions of another famous person would ultimately change the course of history. I'm Dr. Scott Davis, and thanks again for joining me.